foundation was founded in 1994 after an act of Congress meant to help educate Americans and memorialize all the victims of communism. So while for the first almost more than 15 years of its existence, the focus was on erecting a memorial here in Washington dedicated to the victims of communism, always from the beginning, there was the hope and dream that one day there would be a museum for the victims of communism. So I'm thrilled that we have the opportunity now here in 2022, 15 years after dedicating our memorial statue to the victims of communism, we are opening the doors for the Victims of Communism Museum, a unique project. Something like this has never been done in the United States.
We reached out to President George W. Bush and said, would you be our honorary chairman? He agreed to do that. It was unusual. Then would you be there for the dedication of the memorial and accept it for the American people? Now, of course, Mr. Bush was a Republican, but in a very much in a bipartisan way, the public law authorizing our foundation, authorizing our memorial, was signed by President Bill Clinton. So we had both a Republican president and a Democratic president, both coming together, in effect, endorsing the idea of a memorial museum to the victims of communism. We ask, oh, well, how many people died in the Holocaust? And almost automatically, most people can say 6 million Jews. But if we were to go to people and ask them how many people died under communism, they would have no idea. They might say a million, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. They had no idea that 100 million people had died under communism. And beyond that, that some over 1 billion people now, today, 1 billion, 1.5 billion as a matter of fact, live under communism today, and not by their choice. Not by their choice. So we saw it from the beginning. And what we wanted to do was to create a memorial and a museum which would focus on two things: remembrance, remembering the victims, and research, monitoring, keeping up with what was happening in the communist regimes of China, North Korea, Cuba, Laos, and Vietnam. So that this was the beginning of this idea of ours. People said, well, you're crazy. You'll never get approval for an anti-communist memorial in the nation's capital. We said, yes, we will.
Now we will receive a video message that has been sent to us on behalf by Piotr Gliński, the Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Poland.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here, although my presence is rather symbolic today, at the opening ceremony of an immensely significant institution, the Museum of the Victims of Communism. It is no coincidence that Poland has a major share in creating this institution and the story of this place. Communism has left a great mark on the Polish history of the 20th century, and its effects are still prevalent in public sphere.
Brakowało nam takiej właśnie przestrzeni zinstytucjonalizowanej, w ramach której będzie można w sposób usystematyzowany, metodyczny, dedykowany dla młodzieży amerykańskiej opowiadać o komunizmie. Do tej pory oczywiście mieliśmy punktowe akcje, przedsięwzięcia kampanijne, edukacyjne. Nie było takiego punktu zinstytucjonalizowanego i to punktu gdzie? W Waszyngtonie. Punktu w miejscu, w którym jest ośrodek władzy naszego sojusznika Stanów Zjednoczonych. Punktu, w którym jest bardzo wiele think tanków, z którymi także kooperujemy. Punktu, w którym funkcjonują takie organizacje trzeciego sektora jak Victims of Komunizmu, Memorial Foundation, partnerskie fundacje, z którymi możemy po prostu o wiele więcej, możemy uruchomić synergię tych potencjałów naszych.
Jest to dosyć spore wyzwanie, ale też i szansa, dzięki której polska dyplomacja, polscy intelektualiści, polscy specjaliści z zakresu wojskowości, z zakresu kultury i dziedzictwa narodowego, polscy dyplomaci mogą realizować dzięki temu swoje długofalowe cele. Chcemy, by ta instytucja była ciałem, była instytucją, która będzie rezonowała na przyszłość poprzez prezentację doświadczenia nie tylko historycznego, ale także tego, co się dzieje w chwili obecnej, czyli geopolitycznego kryzysu. Tu, gdzie nie tylko Amerykanie, ale wszyscy turyści mogą bezpłatnie zwiedzić szereg muzeów, przypomnijmy najważniejszych muzeów w Stanach Zjednoczonych, o dosyć dużej sile oddziaływania, to właśnie tutaj, gdzie podejmuje się najważniejsze decyzje, dwie przecznice od Białego Domu, możemy mówić o tym, czym był komunizm, możemy pokazywać, jak my mogliśmy wyjść jako społeczeństwo zarówno w 20 roku, jak również dziedzictwo Solidarności, jak również Jan Paweł II oraz pokazać, że system komunizmu można rozwalić od środka.
Our vision for the museum is that this will be a central learning hub, an opportunity for Americans and travelers that come to Washington to learn about communism and its victims. Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, hosts millions of school students, school tours, and international tourists, and is an incredible wealth of museums here in Washington. So we think it is fitting that finally there is a museum here in Washington, just 2 blocks from the White House, that's dedicated to the victims of communism and will help educate millions of visitors about the horrors of communism.
We've always looked upon the Holocaust as a model for what we're trying to do. So this museum is really the first step, is really phase one of what we will be doing over the next 5 or 10 years, which is to build a very large, comprehensive museum which will be able to tell the story of all of the nations who have suffered under communism and all the continents. There would be no Victims of Communism Museum if there were not a Polish National Foundation, because they've been one of the most generous and dependable supporters and benefactors of what we're trying to do here. And I think that's so typical of the Polish people, that when they are committed. And so without them, we would not be able to say and open up our doors and to welcome people to what we're showing communism to be about.
Sama konwencja muzeum dedykowana jest dla młodzieży amerykańskiej. To właśnie tutaj ostatnie badania zamawiane przez fundację ukazały, że młodzież amerykańska wskazuje, że poprzez decyzje polityczne Bushów zginęło o wiele więcej ludzi na świecie niż poprzez decyzje polityczne Józefa Stalina. Ten rodzaj ignorancji wymaga bardzo mocnej reakcji, właśnie edukacyjnej, właśnie na terenie Stanów Zjednoczonych. Przypomnę, to jest nasz sojusznik, z którym współpracujemy wielowymiarowo. Tutaj na terenie Stanów Zjednoczonych poprzez budowę muzeum tworzymy latarnię, tworzymy przestrzeń, w ramach której różne instytucje, różne spotkania będą się odbywały i właśnie ten wymiar edukacyjny będzie realizowany w sposób usystematyzowany.
Chcemy, żeby to dalej funkcjonowało na zasadzie ekspansywnej, czy to pokazywania pomocy, jaką Polacy obecnie udzielają Ukrainie. Chcemy też zaprezentować tutaj w Muzeum Ofiar Komunizmu doświadczenie, ale też współpracę Polskiej Fundacji Narodowej z organizacjami pozarządowymi, ale także z organizacjami sektora publicznego, takimi jak Instytut Pamięci Narodowej, takimi jak chociażby Muzeum II Wojny Światowej, takimi jak Muzeum Józefa Piłsudskiego w Solejówku. Te wszystkie instytucje współpracują, my z nimi współpracujemy na co dzień i wiemy, jak wiele mają do zaprezentowania opinii publicznej światowej.
Wątek polski jednak wydaje się, że w ramach ekspozycji dominuje. Staraliśmy się, aby właśnie ten komunizm był pokazany od prób powstrzymania go, udanych prób powstrzymania komunizmu w jego marszu na zachód, czyli od bitwy warszawskiej 1920 roku, ale także poprzez podziemie antykomunistyczne w Polsce, na czele z rotmistrzem Pileckim, ochotnikiem z Auschwitz, ale także, aby pokazać wielki wpływ ruchu Solidarność, powstanie NSZZ Solidarność i wpływ tego wielomilionowego ruchu na początek upadku komunizmu w tej formule, w której funkcjonował w okresie zimnej wojny. A więc jest to bezsprzecznie muzeum, które dedykowane jest do opowieści o komunizmie en bloc z perspektywy różnych krajów, ale jednocześnie postaraliśmy się i dzięki życzliwości naszych partnerów właśnie ze Stanów Zjednoczonych, aby ten wątek polski, polska opowieść o komunizmie, nasze doświadczenia związane z walką z komunizmem, z życiem w okresie komunizmu, z totalitaryzmem komunistycznym były jak najbardziej obecne i stanowiły taką immanentną część tej globalnej opowieści.
It's interesting how, and not surprising, Poland is very important to the story of the victims of communism. If not for Poland, there would be even more victims of communism. So right away in Gallery 1, we show what happens after the Bolshevik Revolution when Lenin and the Red Army are trying to expand outside of Soviet Russia. And one of the places they go is toward Poland. They want to take Poland. A lot of people know the story about how there was briefly a communist regime in Hungary after World War I, but not as many here, especially in the United States, know about what Poland did. So there was a war after the Great War, and in this war, Poland was able to throw back the Red Army. And so the Red Army was stopped almost 20 years before the start of World War II. And so victims of communism were created by Soviet Russia within its borders that would soon become the USSR, and that's something for people to think on. In Gallery 2, Poland is very important again. Here there are still people who are resisting and trying to stop communism, but also Gallery 2 is really telling people more about some of the worst repression that communism has done in its history. And so you learn about deportations. Poles are part of the deportations that the communists do. You learn about the horrible Katyn forest massacre, and then also you learn about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that divides Poland, that starts World War II. In the United States, it is not common for Americans to know that two different totalitarian regimes, the Nazis and the communists, that Hitler and Stalin worked together to really start World War II. And we're doing it so that each horrible regime, each totalitarian regime could benefit from it. And then we move into Gallery 3, where Poland is again very important. There's an exhibition just on Poland and the theme of resistance. And Poland has shown itself under the face of great threats and dangers and all sorts of things to just something in the Polish people to resist. And so we have that recounted on the walls here about the theme from the end of World War II all the way up to finally defeating communism, with so many great stories along the way. But also we have in our panel on the Hungarian Revolution the understanding that the Hungarians saw what the Poles were doing in 1956, and that in part inspired the Hungarian Revolution. So we've tried to show in our limited space how different nationalities and countries rise up against the communists, and that sometimes they can help others do so too. And that's something that very much comes out in Gallery 3. And then of course the whole collapse of communism in Europe, going from 1989 to 1991. Poland's again important to that, and we celebrate that here too. We have 2 floors at this facility, and as you move upstairs, one of the things you're seeing is an amazing part of a collection, or a collection of paintings by an artist named Nikolai Getman. He was imprisoned unfairly in the Gulag for years. He got out, and then he started to paint his experience in the Gulag. And so he couldn't show people what he was working on because it was still the Soviet Union after he got out. And then we have a very special room at the top of the stairs for temporary exhibits, for visiting exhibits. And so probably 3, possibly 4 times a year, we'll have a new exhibit, and visitors are welcome to come back and see those. And our very first exhibit, it's a very important one on Tiananmen Square. And this has been put together by a coalition of Chinese dissidents, people who were able to get out of the People's Republic of China. And so some of the pieces of the exhibition have been in the United States for a while, but some of them just got out.
Mój mąż i ja popieraliśmy Muzeum Victims of Communism od wiele, wiele lat i zdecydowaliśmy, że jest czas, żebyśmy fundowali na wyższym poziomie i jesteśmy founding benefactors 3. sali muzeum. Ta sala jest bardzo ważna, bo też tam reprezentuje, jak papież w 1979 roku przyjechał do Warszawy jako pierwszy jego wyjazd spoza Rzymu i do swojego kraju, do Polski. I to było dla mnie bardzo ważne, bo ja byłam w Warszawie w 1979 roku i byłam na mszy, gdzie papież nam wszystkim mówił, że nie możemy się bać i że my wszyscy jesteśmy razem i On nas kocha i Bóg nas kocha i razem będziemy mieli na tyle siłę, żeby zwalczyć przeciwko komunizmowi.
The story of Poland is an inspiring one to all of us, not just Middle Western Americans like me who've had the opportunity to visit Poland over the last 40 years, including under the communist regime, to see the spirit of the Polish people, but to see the story of Poland recreated here in our museum, of what's happened, of both the oppression of communism, then the kind of the existence, whether it had to do with NATO versus the Warsaw Pact, and now the incredible humanitarian efforts of the Polish people. I had the opportunity to be in Warsaw several months ago and to talk about the then just beginning battle in Ukraine, and hearing from my Polish friends about, well, perhaps they were worried about maybe several 100,000 refugees from Ukraine. several 100,000 refugees to Poland is now 3 million plus. And the Polish people have been so welcoming and warming. And we don't quite get there in our museum, but that's part of the story of how the Polish people have not only suffered and then endured, but now are a beacon of freedom and liberty to people still being oppressed by basically totalitarian communist thugs who are still in charge in Russia.
W zarządzie i kto tutaj pracuje i kto popiera muzeum, są osoby, co mają i mieli przeróżne stanowiska, co pracowali nie tylko charytatywnie, ale pracowali dla rządu, czy różnych organizacji, czy w Białym Domu, czy w Departamencie Stanu. I w związku z tym my znamy bardzo dużo osób i mamy możliwość uczyć o historii komunizmu. Ja miałam możliwość służyć jako ambasador Stanów Zjednoczonych do Estonii. I Estonia, tak jak Polska, ma bardzo dużą historię związku z geografią, z komunizmem. I w Estonii, tak samo jak w Polsce, wszyscy wiedzą, że to jest kłamstwo. Bo i w Estonii, i w Polsce każdy jeszcze ma kogoś z rodziny, co albo był wywieziony do Związku Radzieckiego, albo był zamordowany, albo sami, nawet jak ja pamiętam w Polsce, że w sklepach nie było co kupić, że było bardzo trudno, żeby dostać jedzenie. Więc i w Estonii, i w Polsce większość ludzi ma tą samą opinię, że komunizm to jest kłamstwo. I wszystko, co możemy, musimy zrobić, żeby być wolni i walczyć o wolność. W Ameryce jest troszeczkę inaczej, ponieważ geografia i większość młodzieży w Ameryce nie wie o komunizmie. To, co oni słyszą, to jest coś, co oni sobie wyobrażają, nie oparte o faktach i doświadczeniu.
You can learn about communism in a textbook, but unless you can hear someone's stories or experience it, one of the hopes we have here is here in the museum giving our visitors a better sense of what communism was like without having lived under it. That's critical to helping someone really learn and understand what is communism and why it is so evil.
We are trying to convey to the people of the United States, the people from every ethnic, every part of America's multicultural background, is communism was and remains a worldwide threat, a worldwide stain on the advancement of human liberty, of the human cause. And that's what the basic idea of the museum is, to remind people very specifically, because in this day and age, people have a very short attention span. People don't have the time or the attention span to read a 500-page book about the evils of communism around the world, but we hope they'll have the time and make the time to spend an hour or 2 hours with us touring our galleries, asking questions of our people here on the staff, and learning about what communism was, as well as then reading our papers about what still goes on with communism or what happened in different circumstances in the past, because it's such an incredibly large story to have to tell that you can't do it in just an hour or two. But if you can pique someone's interest in a particular aspect of it, we think it could be very, very important for the future. That's what this battle is still all about. We're still in a ideological battle with people who think very differently from those of us who believe in freedom. if you believe in freedom, you don't believe in what communism is about.
I still believe that one day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, that all of the communist countries today will be free, will be democratic, will be able to say that once and for all, no more of communist tyranny.